Pivot or Die is an amazing book by author Gary Shapiro. He is the CEO of Consumer Technology Association, and that is the company that owns the CES conference, which is Consumer Electronics Show. It's perhaps the world's biggest electronics and technology show, exhibition, and conference in the world, and it happens in Las Vegas, right? So let me take a step back. So 2 weeks ago, I was at the CES conference, the CES show rather, in Las Vegas, and had the opportunity to see a lot of the greatest technologists in the world. Unfortunately, I got to miss the speech by the CEO of NVIDIA. That was the opening keynote speech on the Monday of the week, because the following day was my son's birthday. So I made sure that I got there after my son's birthday. I mean, that's more important than seeing any celebrity. I got to see keynote speeches from the CEO of Delta. And I got to rub shoulders above all with Gary Shapiro himself. He is the CEO of CTA, as I alluded to earlier, and I got to buy his book, Pivot or Die. He actually signed the book, and I took a picture with him. He was a very cool, awesome guy. So I had a couple of books in my backlog, and I realized that, okay, despite the fact that I had 10 other books in my backlog, I'm like, I'm gonna read this book because it's really interesting. So I get to read the book, and it's really rich with important lessons. I'm only like halfway through the book. I must say that, it's got a whole lot of lessons, rich lessons, and it's really got me thinking, right, about the importance of pivoting. So the book, for example, gives a couple of examples and stories, right? One of the examples is, CTA itself. During COVID, they made very important pivots, right? Because this conference is in person. They collect a lot of revenue per annum. They have a whole lot of costs with it. And above all, the purpose is to expose a lot of the greatest technologies worldwide. So large corporations can show the latest technologies in their companies, and startups also have an opportunity to show their technologies and inventions and prototypes to investors, to retailers, and potential buyers, right? And a lot of deals do happen. That's the main purpose of it. So, all of a sudden COVID hits and they had to pivot towards an online show in 2021. And in 2022, they made another pivot to a hybrid show because, by then the vaccination plan had been rolled out, and, different states and different countries were open to different levels of degrees, right? And they did experience some success, but above all, the main purpose, which was linking technologists to, market and enabling commerce for technologists, that purpose did happen. It tells the story of, for example, Travis Kalanick. He's the founder of Uber, right? And I didn't actually know that before Uber, he had a couple of other ventures. Well, I imagined that he did, but I didn't know what they were. And one of them was like a file sharing business. It was like a peer-to-peer file sharing kind of thing. It even talks about how he had problems with IRS. He had like a debt of like $110,000. Somehow he managed to overcome that, and eventually he launched Uber, and that was a huge hit, right? And later on, we learned that he had a couple of issues due to governance problems, but it's a very successful business, even though they have a good succession plan. The book gives examples of Delta, the airline. Delta also made very important pivots during COVID, and had they not made those pivots, would have failed. It talks about Melanie Perkins. She's the founder of Canva, and I believe her mother had like a business of sort of like an online school book that they used to sell in Australia because she's Australian. Talks about how she faced a challenge of raising capital in her early stages of business, and fast forward to today, where the business is valued probably over $40 billion. So, it's a lesson that I've learned myself from my own personal life, and this book just reminds us that it's really important not to fall in love with your original idea as an entrepreneur, because guess what? It's going to change. Like today, you might have a business idea. When you actually implement it, you're going to start noticing certain challenges. You're going to start noticing certain flaws and weaknesses in your business model. And the best thing you must do is make adjustments as quickly and as efficiently as possible to keep your business alive. Otherwise, it's going to fail. And listen, you might just find that the business model is not good enough, and you might spot a different opportunity and go with it. Because in the process of actually failing, you're learning lessons and gaining skill sets that you would never have had you not. From my own experience, I mean, I'm not like a big time entrepreneur. I will be, I believe, but for example, I'm going from an employee, someone that has some sort of real estate experience, to building a tech business. And recently I built one, and I must say that I did notice that, number one, the original business idea that I had was heavily regulated. Number two, the cost structure is quite hefty because for the business to move forward and for the business to be implemented, it would be reliant on a whole lot of third-party service providers that are very expensive, and it would make the subscription extremely expensive for the business. It would either be overpriced or it would be difficult to become profitable. And even base case wise, you need like $4 million in the first 4 years for the business to stay afloat because it was going to lose money. So I pivoted to something else that has more chances of being bootstrapped, right? So, speaking of pivoting, this book kind of reminded me of a lesson that we've learned from Seun Sanni, who's appeared in our podcast. As a reminder, he's a CEO and co-founder of PayFi, which is a renter's credit solution for renters that don't have a credit profile. So now let's listen to this snippet when Seun Sanni gives an account of a pivot that he's made in his business model and the growth and success that he's experiencing right now. So when I first came across PayFi, my initial impression was that the main business model was around, PayFi stepping in as the guarantor for renters, for tenants that didn't have a credit score. Once upon a time, that was me, but I've been fortunate to build a credit score quite quickly. I'm sure I haven't told you this, but I did live in the United States as a child. Obviously, I didn't have a credit history or credit record. So when I came here as an adult, that's a working adult, I didn't have that credit score. So in the first place that I rented, I had to put a couple of cash up front. So I was approved with conditions. So I wasn't approved based on my scorecard, credit score. And the mentality of a lot of property owners in the country is that it's better to have no credit than to have bad credit. So I fortunately was in the no credit side of things, and I actually subscribed to a service where for each rent payment, it does build towards my credit score. So I was under the impression that you were the equivalent of, this rental credit company that I work with, right? However, when I look closely at your business model, it's different from what I initially understood. So basically, from what I understand, this whole credit solution for tenants is almost like bait to build a database of tenants. So your real business is selling services to your landlord. So that was really mind blowing. So my question is that correct? And if so, was that the original business model when you guys launched this rental credit solution in the market, or did you pivot into that? How was that journey?
Very good question. Very good question. So the first answer, are you correct? Yes, that's how we started. Was that the original business model? No. Did we pivot into this? Yes, based on request and patterns that we saw in the market. So yes, you're right that we were an equivalent of that company that guaranteed and then help you report your rent to the credit bureau to build credit. Yes, that's how we started, right? And then just like I mentioned, I do think that the current um, metrics used to score the credit points are archaic and outdated. Here's why. Um, if you were to say uh, the credit score doesn't predict my ability to be able to pay my rent, right? It doesn't. What it does is to show that I have been diligent in paying up loans that I've collected up until this point, right? That's the data that you have.
Yes.
But we are saying that, look, how about we tell you that we can predict if this person would be able to continue to pay their rent based on actual economic situation that has nothing to do with this person directly. Say, for instance, AI in the next 6 months is going to wipe out an entire industry because everyone will start using AI for that service as opposed to using the humans that were employed.
Right.
You're a landlord and you're accepting a credit score from that person. You're not factoring this risk into it, right? You just say, oh, they'll be able to pay. But I'm only able to pay if I'm earning, right? So if I get laid off, how do I get money to pay? So we created an AI algorithm that actually is able to predict whether people would default within their lease period or not. That was the first thing we wanted to change from using a credit score. And this was something that would be helpful whether you're a newcomer or whether you're in the country. For instance, if I'm coming from Nigeria as a software engineer, if I'm coming to Canada and I'm coming to Toronto, based on the data that we have, within 6 months, you're likely going to get a job, right? So now it depends, how much do you have in your bank account? Is it able to take you those 6 months if you don't get a job so that you don't default on the rent, depending on how much your rent is, right? Now, this person with this kind of profile would score very low on our risk profile, and we're able to guarantee them, we say to the landlords, we would guarantee this person because we know that they will get a job and they will be stable. On the contrary, if you're a medical doctor and you come into Canada, it takes you about 24 to 48 months to be able to practice as a medical doctor because of the exams that you have to do and because of the training that you have to go through. A medical doctor on our profile is a very high risk tenant because they cannot find any other job to do. They've been practicing as medical doctors in the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years from their home country. They don't know how to work retail store. They don't know how to go be a Uber driver. They don't know how to go to Uber Eats. So they don't know how to do factory jobs. They have to look for job that can sustain them, something that they can do. So they have to learn something afresh. So it takes them a while to settle into the country unless they have a lot of financial reserves. So, right.
Heard the account from Seun Sanni, the co-founder of PayFi, of how they made a pivot in their business model that has helped the business grow in a very impressive way, right? So when they started, the main business model was around them providing solutions for tenants that didn't have a credit score. So Canada is a country that does receive a lot of migrants that have a relatively migrant-friendly immigration policy, and they do receive a lot of migrants that get into the country to study and to work, right? A lot of these migrants are pretty, I won't say affluent. Some of them are affluent. Some of them have the potential to become affluent, but they start off by not having a credit score in the system. So initially, when you rent an apartment, you need a guarantor to do that, right? And they stepped in as a guarantor, and they partner with insurance companies that play the guarantor role for them, because normally such people would need like someone else to be a guarantor that would literally step in case you fail to pay rent, which is very high risk. Even the Bible advises against that. Or some property owners will ask you to pay up an additional deposit to sort of like additional guarantee. That was my case here in the United States. So then over time, they made a pivot in the business model. One of the pivots was, instead of that being the main business became, collecting data from a bunch of these tenants that would eventually build solid credit scores and credit profiles and sell the information of those tenants to smaller property owners that were struggling to find potential tenants. That became one business model pivot. Another pivot that they made was building an AI model that would predict the probability of rent payment by a certain tenant. And here he gave an example of how they profiled the risk of a doctor, for example. Because a doctor is a very specialized profession. Because in practical terms, if you're a doctor or you're a surgeon, you're very specialized in your field, in that particular area of surgery. And now if you lose your job, it's going to be very difficult for you to find another job that is not as specialized, where you can really leverage on the skill that you've built. It's kind of different from someone who, let's say, is a salesman in a car dealership, right? If he loses his job, he can easily pick up, another job where he's a salesman of, let's say, car parts or something like that, right? Because he's got the salesman skills, and it's just a matter of him, learning the new components that he's selling into the market, and he can eventually, you know, get another job that pays as generously as the previous job that he had. So I hope the information was useful. I mean, to me, it is useful. It's really important to just keep an open mind to make pivots. Sometimes the pivot can be in addition to your existing business model. It can be a total adjustment. But regardless of what it is, it's important to have the discernment on when to do it, time it properly, be as cost efficient as possible when you do it, and it should eventually translate to success. So anyways, see you in the next episode. In the next 2 episodes, we're going to have some really interesting guests on the show, so stay tuned and God bless.